This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will turn our attention shortly to the, I think, pretty impressive so far attempts by the media regulator Ofcom to actually keep young people safe online. New rules aiming to curb those harmful algorithms. And then, now I want to talk about something that you will almost certainly either roll your eyes at or go, oh, come off it. But there's a story around, in fact, I'm going to tease you a bit before I tell you what it is. There's a story around today getting a lot of coverage, not just on LBC, but on other radio stations as well, and television stations. In fact, it may have got more coverage on the BBC than it did here. And it is a story that will affect almost nobody in this country. It will affect almost nobody currently listening to this programme. And yet, were you to measure its importance simply by scale of coverage, amount of time dedicated to it, amount of headlines generated by it, both in the print and the broadcast media, you could be forgiven for thinking that it is a story of epic import. Can you say import like that, or do you have to stick an "ns" on the end? Is it best to stick an "ns" on the end? I think in the 19th century they would have said import, but things like that make me sound quite pompous sometimes, don't they? Don't say sometimes in that tone of voice, please. It's okay. I'll say that again. You could be forgiven for thinking that it was a story of epic import, "ns", epic import, "ns", and I'm not sure whether it is or not. And I'm not going to tell you what the story is. I'm going to see whether or not you can guess. You can, of course, what's it? Me? What's it? WhatsApp? What's up? Me? 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. You can wave at me if you want from across. Someone did that today as I was cycling through Hyde Park. Thank you. Scared the life out of me. You could shout out my name. I thought, how on earth do you recognise me? I'm wearing a beanie hat and sunglasses. It was very pleasant. Always nice. But what is the story today? Getting way more coverage than seems appropriate, but which may actually be appropriate, and that is where we will somehow successfully mould a conversation to have together after 11 o'clock today. I've got the managing editor of Al Jazeera television coming on the programme today to talk about the Israeli government's extraordinary decision to essentially ban them from the country. One of the few outlets that's actually managed to get proper reportage out of Gaza. So that will be very interesting. And speaking of stories that don't get necessarily the coverage that they deserve, we're also going to be talking to Nick Davies, who blew the lid off the phone hacking scandal back in the day, almost single-handedly. Oddly enough, the New York Times was probably the second biggest contributor to that juggernaut of reporting. And he's back with yet more, arguably even more, remarkable revelations, which you're obviously not going to read about in most of the newspapers that are still in the crosshairs of these continuing legal actions, or indeed hear about. Certainly not. Imagine if I had an awful lot of Rupert Murdoch flavoured history on my CV. I doubt I'd be bringing this latest episode to your attention with much alacrity, but I don't, so I am. That'll be happening later in the programme as well, after PMQs, which of course kicks off at 12. It's not Charles and Harry. That's not the story. And no, it's not the Trump trial either. That is interesting. Former president allegedly having a penchant for being spanked on the bottom by a lady wielding a magazine with his own face on the cover. There's a lot to unpick there, but I'm no Sigmund Freud, so I won't even begin to try. So yeah, a lot of you are getting it right. A lot of you are getting the story correct, but I'm going to say it's not Donald Trump and it's not the royal family. It's nothing to do with Stormy Daniels, Prince Harry or King Charles, and we'll see whether or not we get a consensus emerging in before 10:15. I'll put you out of your misery before 10:15. But this is a really important story. Social media apps, including TikTok and Instagram, will be told to tame aggressive algorithms, pushing harmful content to children. The rules will be are being announced today. I think, and what I love about conversations like this is that you are often much, much more qualified to contribute to the conversation than I am, because you work in the sector. So let's just get that up front and centre. If you work in the sector, if you have worked in the sector, if you understand this issue, properly, technologically. I'm looking for I'll handle the philosophy. You leave the philosophy with me, all right? I'm interested in the technology and philosophy and ethics I can handle. Like, should you be policing your children? Should they have access to things? What is the relationship between end-to-end encryption and other necessary means of communication? You handle the technology, all right? And you can tell me how feasible all of this is, because Ofcom generally know what they're doing. They're not at the best of years with the rather slow response to some of the new modes of broadcast in this country that challenge some of the things that we've previously taken for granted. But they do know what they're doing. And when they say they're going to clean up social media and search engines under powers created by the Online Safety Act, I can tell you with absolute certainty that they certainly mean what they say. That is not, of course, the same as saying things that will be meaningful. If tech companies do not cooperate, they could be hit with fines of £18 million or 10% of global revenue. They could see their services blocked and they could see criminal proceedings commenced against senior managers, all of which I welcome. I think all of those things are really good ideas. In the UK, it will be messaging services such as WhatsApp and Snapchat that will have to make sure children are not added to any group chats without their consent. Under 18s will be able to block and mute other social media accounts and disable comments under their posts. That seems to me to be digging into the detail. But if you're looking for the headlines, if you're looking at the principles, the question here is, can the law keep young people safe online? And how hard is it going to be in your family to press reverse on some of this stuff? That's the question that I think is missing from some of the coverage today. It's focused probably rightly and probably necessarily on the heavy hitters, on the big players, looking at the platforms themselves and the order to them to install tough age checks. But in terms of, I suppose, in terms of whether or not, how much responsibility is going to be left with the family is a question that we may move towards. But I want to begin with the really simple question, which is whether or not you think it will work. I do. I've changed my view on this, thanks partly, of course, to Esther Jai, the mother of Brianna Jai, whose vicious murder was in some way spawned by social media access. But I also think that Esther Jai was driven by a desire to protect other children from some of the stuff that Brianna had to see and access on social media. If I was feeling pessimistic, if we were talking about bullying and things like that online, if I was being pessimistic, I would say, well, children will just find another way to bully each other. Children will always find another way to bully each other. But, you know, one of the things about going to boarding school is that if you get older and you're lucky enough to have a bit of therapy and realise the damage that boarding school can do to you, you realise the importance when we were young of closing the door at the end of the day. So one of the things about boarding school is that you never get to shut the door. You never get home. If you're getting bullied at boarding school, you're getting bullied 24/7. Of course, now, in the age of social media, that's true of everybody. Every child who is being exposed to unpleasantness or every child who is being pursued by their peers in an unhappy way has no escape. I know you could lock your phone in a box, throw it in the sea or something like that, but even then you'd know that there was stuff out there that other people could read and see that was constantly appearing about you. That sort of negative side of what they call FOMO, or fear of missing out, is considerable and real. And I mean, could you do that? Could you walk past a door in real life when you knew people on the other side of it were talking about you? You'd find it pretty hard. It's a bit different if you do what I do for a living, but in the first few years of doing this, I found it very hard. I want to know everything. You'd even search your own name on the internet. You soon learn not to do things like that. But if you're a normal person with a normal job and a normal life, or you're a normal child, you want to know, what are they saying? What's going on? So there is a kind of mild pessimism with regard to the feasibility of it. But my optimism comes from gambling sites, oddly. My optimism comes from the simple knowledge that I would find it very hard, probably not impossible. Don't be a pedant about it, all right? We're not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I would find it very hard to place a bet online without nicking a credit card or do you see what I mean? Placing a bet online as me. I would find it very hard to do that in this country at this time if I was under 18. And therefore, I believe that it is perfectly possible for these platforms to install similarly tough age checks to stop children from accessing pornography and content that promotes suicide, self-harm and eating disorders. And that, I think, is where we will start this morning. You are qualified in a technological sense to contribute to this, and you are going to tell me whether or not you think this will work, okay? So that's part one. 0345 6060 973. Will it work? Will it work? And then question number two for everybody, if like me, you're not really technologically qualified to talk about this, can we look at the bigger question? I don't think we've done this before. I heard one mother being interviewed today. It was a really good interview, actually, a really sensitively handled interview. And there was only one question missing from it, which I wouldn't have asked myself either because it's too tricky. The sort of point of entry, I think even parents of children in the relevant age range don't quite know, do we? Because if we did, it would never happen. We could look after them. But the point of entry, what is it that causes social media access to spiral into something really horrible? What is the sort of siren appeal of content that's horrible? It's quite often self-harm and suicide. Content that creates or increases the likelihood of children going down that route. Those are the stories I find most unbearable, I think, because somehow, personally, I find it a little bit easier to process people doing terrible things to other people. It's a story of time immemorial. But the idea of a teenager being slowly sucked into a world, a sinister world of self-harm and suicide, I find almost impossible to contemplate for too long. And that tipping point intrigues me. What happens to the mind of the child that means they can't turn away from the stuff that is making them miserable? So at the top of that pyramid, you've got the stuff I've just referred to, the words that begin with S. But at the bottom, and then halfway down, you've got harmful pornography that doesn't teach them anything nice, possibly teaches them not to like themselves very much. And then at the bottom of it, you've got the endless borderline addiction to the content equivalent of junk food. You know, they're munching on hydrogenated fries, the intellectual equivalent of hydrogenated fries, but they can't turn away, they can't put them down. They're addicted to looking at clips of, people with unfeasible physiques or looking. So that what is it about social media, stroke the internet, that reaches parts of our brain that none of the other phenomena have reached? We talked to Jonathan Haidt about this last week, who's written a book really in the heart of this issue. And I thought he was at his most impressive when he was dismissing the suggestion that it's just another moral panic. I've got a horrible feeling that I used to go down that road. It's just another moral panic. Video didn't kill the radio star. Grand Theft Auto didn't create a country full of marauding car thieves and gangsters. The 18 certificate films didn't corrupt civilization as we know it. Mary Whitehouse was not right if you're of a certain age. And so it's tempting, almost reassuring to say this is just another moral panic. But it isn't, is it? There's something quite specific about the smartphone stroke social media stroke internet's relationship with a young mind. Never mind an old mind. It's tough enough for us sometimes to remember where reality ends and fantasy begins. But for young minds, there's something about this cocktail of technology and content that has created a really insidious world which some children can't get out of and some never visit at all. So what's that about? What is it about social media that is so dangerous? 0345 6060 973. So if you're technologically qualified, I want to hear about the feasibility and plausibility of some of these measures that are being brought in. Chiefly, age limit means you can't get in. You won't be able to see any of the stuff, or most of the stuff that's considered most toxic. And then for the rest of us, what is it? What is it that creates so much danger for young people on a scale and in a way that we have never seen before? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. Dopamine, James, writes Sam. It's all about the dopamine. You release the dopamine when you eat those hydrogenated fries. You release the dopamine when you open your phone and see a notification or you swipe on TikTok. It's dopamine addiction. Same with porn, same with gambling, slot machines. Mobile phones are designed in similar ways. And Samuel gives us further advice. You need to refine your request and ask for product managers in tech to call in. That this would give a good product explanation of the landscape you're exploring in this conversation. It is, of course, the software, not the hardware, that is the problem, although I think for some people it's quite hard to distinguish between the two. And I'll read this one out, Simon, in Brixton, and I won't put you in Idiot's Corner, but it's really unhelpful if you stop to think about it for a moment. Great topic, but let's face it, parents giving kids under 14 smartphones is the problem. They just want a scapegoat. Mate, at secondary school, you won't be able to do your homework unless you've got a tablet in many, many secondary schools. So, and that's going to have the same technology on it that a smartphone has. So that's why I'm not putting you in Idiot's Corner, because I think that was made in good faith. But it is not helpful. The genie is out of the bottle. There's no point saying, God, if only we hadn't let that genie out of the bottle. The question is, can we get it back in again? Louisa is in Barnet. Louisa, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi.
Hello.
I speak to kids and I speak to families every single day, and I can see the impact that social media is having on their mental health. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle just by expecting Ofcom to fine these businesses, this big tech, because fundamentally they care about profits over the safety of their users, and we have to start tackling this issue in the same way that we tackled smoking. We had tobacco. We thought it was safe. It's not safe. There is evidence, and that's the work that John Haight's been doing recently, like you said. We understand now that self-harm and suicidal ideation skyrocketed in about 2012, 2013, which correlates, right at the time that sort of the peak of, the smartphone adoption. We know that smartphones and social media have been designed using this persuasive technology that reinforces what innocently they think are your interests. Now, if your state of mind, I'm interrupting you, which is annoying because you're in full flow. But the tobacco analogy falls down here because there are not millions of people using tobacco in a perfectly healthy and safe fashion, are there? Very true. Very good point. But I guess the correlation and the reason why I use that analogy is because we need to start looking at social media. I get that, but I just to sort of second guess what some people might be shouting. So Ofcom can't really do what you're doing. Ofcom regulates the industry. That is separate. You're talking about legislation or education policy, I think. I'm talking about education policy particularly. I can tell you, though, that there's young people right now that are sitting in secure mental health units whose social media algorithms are literally displaying the most harmful content because their state of mind is thus that they have this addictive device in their hands to use as effectively distraction or whatever from, being in hospital. And they are drawn, because of the addictive nature of it, to particular types of content that then get reinforced by these algorithms. Now, if we're not teaching kids from a very young age, from the moment that they need to pick up a tablet, which is becoming more and more frequent and younger, how to use them safely and how they're designed, then I don't quite know what we expect. And on top of that, not just educating kids, but educating grown-ups, because you try and tell a grown-up who has conditioned or become addicted to a particular cigarette, tell a grown-up to stop smoking all of a sudden. you can't expect that they would do that without the education that is needed.
Okay,
I mean, education that talks about
no one's going to dispute a single thing you're saying, and today's conversation is about the efforts that Ofcom is going to and the measures that Ofcom is introducing. So let me just steer you back towards those. Do you have a view on how feasible it is to actually pull down the drawbridge, to actually drop the portcullis and stop children under a certain age getting close to an awful lot, because it will never be all, but an awful lot of stuff that you have just described?
Look, I think legislation and education together are definitely going to contribute to the possibility of that happening, working.
So today is a good day.
I think it's a step. It's a step forward. I think it's also distracting us from the generation that have been completely forgotten and that are being effectively failed by the services because of the impact that social media is having on them.
Yes, and part of that will just be from a failure to appreciate how quickly the problem was developing and skyrocketing. On a slightly less serious note, you talked about persuasive technology. I don't suppose you can remember what the fancy term is, because I came across it when I was writing about
persuasive technology.
No, there's another one. When I came across it when I was writing about fixed odds betting terminals, but I've got a mental block on it, Louisa. Every time I try and remember what it is.
It's in The Social Dilemma. That's what they talk about it, first of all. There's a fantastic Netflix film that's...
No, I've seen that, and that is brilliant. But there was a phrase. That is a phrase I loved when I was writing about fixed odds. Oh, hang on. Hey, whoa. State something harm. State something, harm something. Yeah, this is the content you're tuning in for every day. Louisa, thank you. I'll squeeze in Rifat, who's in Chingford. Rifat, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. I'm a YouTuber, streamer and things.
Aren't we all, Rifat? Aren't we all these days?
I know. But it's as a father of three as well, from a 12-year-old to an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old as well, at all different points of their lives, all different points of technology. It's being a YouTuber and kind of seeing the tools that you can use and things as that has really heightened my awareness of the pitfalls that there are for children and how easily, something that they may watch once or something that may come across their or
this is the algorithm.
Kind of platform. Exactly. And the problem is the algorithm, the data that, that on one platform they may look at is shared amongst multiple platforms. And this is the problem with saying that, what's going to happen with Ofcom may work. It's not going to work because, unfortunately, what will happen is you're just going to get a blame game scenario because it's going to be very difficult to quantify or link how watching videos on a certain platform has led to a certain individual's actions.
Well, you don't need to. You don't need to. I mean, there is a downside to this, and I suspect it's a downside that people like you will suffer, in that if you do tame the aggressive algorithms that push harmful content to children, you will be taming the aggressive algorithms that push harmless content to children. Yeah. But I can live with that, mate.
Exactly. And to be honest with you, I think anyone in good conscience can, to be honest with you. My channel is all about just trying to bring fun and laughs and stuff, like family stuff, essentially. Sure. But there's so much stuff that's been going on for years, like companies like Lad Bible and stuff like that, where it's all about fails and meme videos, people getting hurt and them for laughs, essentially. And it's been turned to...
Do you think that's like a gateway? Do you think that's an entry level for bad stuff? Because I got my algorithm is attuned to... I've got constant feed. My feed is full of people slipping over on ice. Or accidents on, they're never nasty. They're always put together by the same... outfits that you've just alluded to, not just that one, but there's never anything. No, of course. Like it's like watching an episode of He-Man or something like that. No one ever gets or the A-Team rather, when no one actually gets hurt.
The difference is certain people, depending where they are in their life, education, background, and stuff, and mental well-being,
they'll go down a different route. I hear you. So I'm late for the news. I warned you you'd have to be quick. And the phrase has come into my state corporate harm maximisation. So it is literally a combination of technology and law designed to maximise the amount of time that people, in the case of fixed odds betting terminals, play for. And the longer you play for on a fixed odds betting terminal, the more money you're putting into the slot. But of course, with social media, it is literally designed, incredibly sophisticated psychological and technological efforts to maximize the amount of time you stay for. There you go. It's the amount of time you stay for, and that is state corporate harm maximization. But the difference is that when you're betting, some people could argue that they bet happily and safely and without any major problems. But on social media, an awful lot of it is perfectly healthy. Even on the sites that are causing the biggest problems, a lot of those interactions are charming. Mine is full at the moment of table tennis for some reason. I must have watched 10 clips of amazing table tennis moments the other night, and then my feed is just filled up with table tennis. Who can possibly argue that there's a problem with that? And yet it's the same algorithm that is filling up a 14-year-old... story I heard this morning could make me cry, to be honest. A 14-year-old girl's phone when her mum, after she's died, her mum goes and looks at the devices and finds all of this endless cavalcade of content, which is looking at the nastiest and the darkest corners of humanity. 10:32 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:35. It is, I think, a fair headline. Britain leads charge to keep young safe online. I think partly because of the heartbreaking stories with which we are all familiar. The appetite for change has managed to do that difficult thing. It's managed to galvanise both regulator and political establishment. And so it is that Ofcom today announces plans under the legislation created by the Online Safety Act that would allow them to treat some of these tech companies in the same way that LBC would be treated if I came on air and did something outrageous, or if I were to be somehow Keith was asleep at the wheel and didn't press the dump button in time, and I did things on air that were dangerous or criminal or insightful or just gross. LBC would be in a whole heap of trouble, and hopefully these tech companies will be as well. 10:36 is the time. George is in Hertfordshire. George, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
yeah,
mate.
Great show, like always.
Thank you.
I was on just this morning. I was on this morning on BBC Breakfast, along with 4 the other 10 bereaved parents who have suffered the loss of their and our beautiful children, and all of this again through social media. All of our stories are different, however very alike, and it all boils down to the tech companies allowing data to be released without it being monitored. It all comes down to parents not understanding, unfortunately, the dangers and the impact that it can have on their children. And just by having a mobile phone, where back in our time, we never had mobile phones and we were safe at home. Now you're at home, and you're at home with another 1 trillion other people because you've got a mobile phone.
And the people who love you most in the world might be sitting downstairs, and yet you're upstairs on your own in hell. I can't begin to imagine what that's like, George. How comfortable are you talking about what happened to your child?
Look, I mean, ever since we lost our beautiful son, Christopher, who I would actually say was actually murdered in a sense from predators through social media. And ever since then, we set up a charity. And I thought I'd set up something very niche. So we do presentations at schools, and we talk to parents. We go to banks. We go to schools. We go to various places, and we talk to people and educating them in the sense of making them understand the dangers of social media and how their children are not safe upstairs. And also we take children out and about, and we take them on trips.
I've just seen it. Eleanor's just pulled it up for me. This is the Christophoros Foundation, and you do it in... The
Christophoros Charity Foundation, ccfworld.org. And you know, look, I mean, there's one rule with children. We say, look, you know, we'll take you out. We'll take 30, 40 children out a go on a coach, and we'll go for a different trip. Like the other day, we took some children to Go 8.
What a brilliant idea!
The other day, we took,
and then you just
slip
in the tricky conversations at opportune moments, rather than that way it's more likely to land, isn't it? You get the information into their young minds in ways that are probably a bit gentler than they might otherwise be.
Absolutely, but above all, there's a rule: you don't take your mobile phone. Are you in agreement with that? And they all say yes.
Yeah.
Me and my wife started this charity, and now we're a committee of 10.
That's fantastic.
And they're all volunteers. Everyone's unpaid, and no one gets paid. And every penny we've raised over £100,000.
Goes right back into the charity.
Goes back into children expense.
I'll stick a link up later on my Twitter to the charity.
Thank you so much.
No, it's the least I can do. How did you, after you lost Christopher?
Mm-hmm.
What did you discover in the after when you started looking into what on earth had led him into such a... For people who don't know, do you mind if I explain briefly what happened?
No.
Or would you rather do it? It might be better if you do it, actually. Or if you can.
Well, after losing Christopher, because he had a 50-day challenge to complete, and failing to do so, they said that they'll disturb and kill his family and all the rest of it.
He thought he thought he was being watched, and he thought he had to do these challenges online, or bad things would happen, and...
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And he to the point where he started unscrewing the alarm panels and unscrewing the alarm sensors, because they made him hold his phone and walk around the house and make sure that nothing's recording them. So to that point, and this is all evidence. This is not something that I'm just assuming. This is all factuals.
And it was through a forum on the dark web, which is one of those phrases that most parents don't fully understand the meaning of, that he got essentially targeted by, as you say, a predator who you consider to, or predators plural, who you consider to be ultimately responsible for his death for reasons that are very, very easy to understand. But did you have the first idea, George, when you sort of had a look at his tech after you lost him? Did you have the first idea of what had been going on?
I had no idea after I lost him.
You poor man.
After I lost Christopher, because Christopher was a very bright, very educated, super mathematician and super on English and science, and wanted to become an architect. And he even submitted his homework at 8:21 in the evening and lost his life by 9:30.
Oh, man.
And again, factuals. And after this, we thought, well, okay, what has gone wrong?
Yeah.
The computers and the PlayStations and these mobile phones were taken by the police. But then they gave it back to us and said, we haven't found anything. I sat down 2 minutes and I found it all.
Really?
I found the grooming. I found the fake accounts through the dark web. I found I found messages being sent to him. I found them sending him photos with very dangerous things like knives, and it was horrendous. What? And I'm thinking, okay, so by the 26th of March, he was telling them, "Don't you dare kill yourself," and then by the 1st of March, Christopher loses his life.
Oh, George.
It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And what you're doing is obviously important. And I have to ask this question. How encouraged are you by what has been announced today?
Look, I have to take my hat off. The Ofcom is trying their best.
Yeah.
The bill's now getting released. But like I said, I don't know if you saw our interview.
I didn't. I was
breakfast this morning.
I was on my way into work.
But it will be a playback, obviously.
Yes.
And if you do, and if the listeners could sit back and see BBC Breakfast, I actually said that, look, every second counts. I know that you're saying that it's being dealt with, and I know that you're saying we're putting actions together, but every second is counting, and every second a life is being lost. We've got to all remember that children between the ages of 7 and 16, their brains are like sponges. So anything that they absorb stays within themselves. Like Christopher, going back to Christopher for a second, I saw a difference in him. And I would sit back and say, Christopher, are you okay?
Yeah.
Yes, Dad, I'm fine. But I said, but you're not okay. What is bothering you, son? Tell us. And we as parents saw that there was a difference in him. But, you know, a very bright, clever kid thinking, okay, he might be stressed out. His GCSEs are coming up. You know,
and I want to protect my parents. I don't want my parents. There might be embarrassment. There might be protection. He could have all sorts of things going on in his mind, which explain why he wouldn't talk to you or his mum about why he was obviously not himself. He was obviously... Can I listen, don't answer this question if you don't want to.
I'll answer anything you ask me, James, honestly.
Well, we'll see, because I don't want to ask you this, but I'm thinking about other people listening who maybe have noticed a bit of change in their boy or in their daughter. I don't think... I'll preface it by saying I don't think, having read a lot around these sort of issues, that you could have done anything differently, but you must have asked yourself that question a million times. What answers have you come up with?
Right, look, I'm sure the same like my Christopher, many other children are the same, and every parent would say the same about their child. Clever, educated, well-mannered, okay?
Yeah.
And when you're being brought up from a very good background, you tend to trust in your son or your daughter. You tend to trust their actions, trust what they say, and trust what they do, because that's how you've brought them up to be.
Yes.
Could I or my wife done anything different? Absolutely not, because we have full trust in him. Yeah. The only thing was that when we were asking him how he is, he would say nothing, I'm fine. And we then gathered why he was saying that, because he thought, you know what, I'm a mastermind. I can deal with this.
Oh,
I can overcome this.
Yeah.
And then my parents will never know. Why do I have to give my parents this additional worry about what's going on in my life? You know? And look, 8:21 he submitted his homework. 9:20 he came downstairs and said, Dad, is it okay if I go and play a little bit? It was a Tuesday. He wasn't allowed to play on a Tuesday. But I allowed him. I said, yeah, go on, son. You've been really good. Go off and play a little bit, but then you've got to go to bed. And he went upstairs, and that was it. You know, and the thing is that you know, each child actually believes that they will master the challenges. But many children actually don't even know they're doing challenges. They don't even know that they're involved in this this attack, because it's the way they do it. These predators are so professional that the way they come across to find a victim is it's just unbelievable.
And well, it's unbelievable until it isn't. It's unbelievable until a tragedy like yours means that you have to believe it. George, mate, that was so helpful, but I'm so sorry that you were in the position to be so helpful.
I just thought that it was important that I call in and talk to you guys, and I hope that it was useful, and I appreciate you putting our website on your site. That'd be really good.
I'll do it now.
And any more schools that want us to go and do presentations, it's totally free. We're happy to do that.
Good man. All right, you take care, yeah?
God bless you.
God bless you. It's 10:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:51. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the government's decision, or I beg your pardon, Ofcom's announcement today of the measures it hopes will keep young people safe online, enabled by legislation created by the Online Safety Act, concerns us most. A lot of love inevitably coming in from our last caller, George. A lot of love and support, and crucially, George, if you're still listening, gratitude as well for having the courage to try to turn your tragedy into something that could be helpful to other people. This from Emma, who has been, in their own words, terminally online since the age of 11. The devil is the algorithm. That's the creeping demon that's poisoning communications. Content for cash is the creature that needs to be leashed and monitored. If you compromise internet anonymity, you lose a fundamental freedom. And they remind me that for an awful lot of young people, the internet can be an escape from the bad stuff, not an entry into it. An old analogy is like keeping lists of what books people checked out of the library. It's not safe to expose people with their real identities, etc. And it's a big challenge. I would cautiously sign up to the idea that this is a step in the right direction, but very cautiously, and largely because of listening to parents like George. Steve's in Manchester. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
I'm in the rather unusual position of defending tech companies here, but in the very usual position of criticising governments.
Go on.
So I don't think there's work. I've done a lot of research, like PhD research into artificial intelligence, and I don't, from what I've heard so far, I don't think this legislation is going to work. So, and the reason why is there's an underlying premise that by saying the AI will solve this problem, then we're kind of making it a mathematical problem. That's basically what AI is. It's just a load of maths.
Well, actually, I was starting more on the age limit point.
Yeah,
actually.
no, indeed. Yeah.
That's not AI, is it? That's...
Yeah, there are some. So there are things like radicalisation. There are things like hate speech. There are a whole bunch of things. So with age limit, it's great. But then when detecting what is harmful content, a lot of that is kind of, we haven't really decided what all those are. So think particularly of hate speech. No one can really decide what hate speech is before we even turn on a computer. So if we're then saying to tech companies, right, you detect hate speech because you've got the algorithms for it, well, they say, well, can you tell us what it is, please?
Well, hate speech is the field in which you've done your PhD, I think.
Yeah.
So,
but then there's radicalisation as well.
No, I know, but I don't want to get sidetracked because everything you're saying is clearly true. But the list here is pornography and content that promotes suicide, self-harm, and eating disorders, and I think they would be quite easy to identify.
That's the problem. Yeah, so
there's not a philosophical debate to be had over what self-harm is, or I mean, certainly not what suicide is. But there is a philosophical debate to be had over what hate speech is.
Yeah. So, but then it's the measures on how to detect it.
Yeah.
So you're basically saying that by saying an algorithm can solve this problem, you're basically saying that a mathematical function can detect someone. But again, suicide ideation.
But I mean, Ofcom are hiring hundreds of humans to monitor. What's going on. That's not an algorithm, is it?
So it depends who the humans are.
No, clearly, but they're definitely whoever they are, Steve. They're not algorithms.
Yeah, but it depends what kind of competence they bring to it.
Yeah, and that's why we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely, yeah. But all I'm saying is, from what I've heard so far, it may not work. But those hundreds of people that they're working with, how they work together. So it's got to be social scientists. It's got to be humanities, like real kind of deep experts in the actual domain.
For elements of it, elements of it, you will need more elements of expertise. But for some of it, the stuff that is actively promoting eating disorders or actively promoting self-harm or suicide, I don't want to step out of my comfort zone here. But that would be relatively straightforward. There's an awful lot of volunteers working in those spaces. I think George, Christopher's dad, who we spoke to a moment ago, will know people and probably himself be able to identify where the line is between safety and danger, but I take your broader point, of course, about the difficulties of thinking this is some sort of panacea or it's as easy as ABC. It is 10:55, and of course the bit we haven't touched on, and rightly so, because we're not coming at it from that angle today, is whether the punishments will work. I said to you some time ago, I say it in the context of all manner of things that libertarians find themselves supposedly in favour of. The only way you can stop these organisations doing things that harm the rest of us is by punishing them. And the only punishments they understand involve either the pocket or prison. So how big a fine would you have to impose upon... These are the largest... I heard one journalist this morning describe them, I think, as the biggest corporations in the history of humanity. So what sort of fine... What size of fine would you need to make them sit up and take notice? Or would you need to see... Who's the deputy chairman of Facebook, of Meta? You need to see Nick Clegg marched into Wormwood Scrubs in handcuffs before I forget what his exact title is, his exact job title is. But that, I mean, how feasible is that is another question. That's where state corporate becomes part of the conversation, part of the equation. Graham's in Royston. Graham, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Hello there. I mean, I've got a teenage son and a couple of daughters who are 6 and 8. A while back, my son went through quite a bad time on the phone and social media and stuff. Luckily enough, we sort of spotted it. So what we did is we, as parents, took the phone away from him and all social media. And within a few weeks, the change in him was amazing because he wasn't sort of seeing that content day in, day out.
What was the content that was disturbing him?
It was sort of going along the lines of like, you get pop-ups of fights, kids being bullied, all that type of stuff. Some things that isn't nice to see. Because he's a young lad, he's easily influenced, and I can see where the influence comes from, because they think, oh, well, if that's happening, that must be good.
Yeah.
And it's not. I grew up in an age where we didn't have any of this type of stuff, and what we had was the local bullies.
How did you... Hang on, because we're going to run out of time. How did you walk that tightrope between, all his mates are still on, like he kind of needs it in some other ways, and yet he didn't have it at all. How did you parent that bit of it?
So what we did is basically sort of said you've got you can use our phone to call them if you want to speak to them.
Right.
You've got school where you can do your talking, and
he didn't need a tablet to do his homework or anything like that.
He did, but that's, again, he sat in the living room and did that in front of us.
Okay.
And now he's a lot better. My two younger children who have tablets, they're only allowed it an hour a day.
And you will be paying a little bit more attention to what might go on in that hour than you might previously have done. Graham, thank you. That was very helpful. I'm always a little wary of the ease with which we can say, oh, you can parent your way out of this problem, because it is not hard to imagine a 14-year-old boy who, well, I don't think there's a 14-year-old boy alive who hasn't hidden things from his parents, however confident they might be that their little treasure is not accessing anything like the kind of stuff that other 14-year-old boys are accessing. But being aware and being on top of it can only be a good thing. I'm sure you weren't intending to suggest that you could avoid some of the tragedies that we've touched upon today through such simple measures, but you can certainly mitigate. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. Have you worked out yet what the topic is? The story is absolutely everywhere today, but I'm not sure how important it is.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. Have you worked out what it is yet? Quite an awful lot of you have, actually. I don't think it's irrelevant, but by 12 o'clock today, or by the time Natasha gets here to ease us into PMQs, I may have concluded that it's not as important as some people are treating it. But you're absolutely right. It is the story about the Garrick Club in central London voting to allow women to become members 193 years after it first opened its doors. It wasn't 52-48. It was passed with a 59.98% of votes in favour at the end of a private meeting where 2 hours of debate by several hundred members unfolded. Non-members were not allowed there. The club's secretary issued a warning before the vote that details were confidential and should not be discussed with non-members. And the result went the way that I think most people expected, albeit that the vote almost certainly wouldn't have taken place without that report 6 weeks ago by Amelia Gentleman in the Guardian newspaper, accompanied by the publication of a list of about 60 names of the club's most influential members. I don't normally like topics that even flirt with the question, is this as important as some people think it is? But never say never. Is this as important as some people think it is? I don't know. Do you know what I'll do? I'll just level with you. I always do. The journalist involved, Amelia Gentleman, is one of my favourite journalists. The work that she's done on Windrush is both inspiring and inspirational. I bet she wishes she could get a result on the Windrush stuff as complete and as comprehensive as the result that she's got on the Garrick Club stuff. So I don't know whether it's a form of intellectual insecurity on my part, but because she thinks it's really important, there's a part of me that thinks it must be. I do, independently of who's done the actual journalism, elements of the report struck me as very, very significant. The fact that the head of the civil service or the head of the security services or various high court judges were all happy to be part of an institution that didn't admit women struck me as deeply problematic. Not least because Simon Case, the head of the civil service, is charged with ensuring that equality runs through every level of that institution, affecting God knows how many, hundreds of thousands of public servants. His job was to ensure equal access to all manner of phenomena, whether it's wages or terms and conditions. And yet he's happy to be a member of a club that doesn't even let women, well, it lets them in, and it even lets them up the front stairs these days, but it didn't used to. Similarly, the head of the security services, happy to be part of an institution that doesn't allow women equality with men. And then the High Court judges, who you found yourself wondering whether or not they could sit in all conscience on cases of... most obviously on cases of sexual equality. I'm bringing a case, my lud, alleging that I have been treated as a second-class citizen by my employer on account of being a woman. And the judge actually is a member of an institution that essentially, I think, treats women as though they are second-class citizens. So the more I think about it and the more I talk about it, the more I think this is really significant. But the more I realise, I'm not sure. I mean, where are you now with those examples? Head of the civil service, head of MI6, High Court judges. Those two, the first two examples, actually resigned when the story came out, which made me even more troubled by it. Why'd you resign when the story comes out? You're head of the civil service and you're head of MI6. And your membership of this club emerges and then you resign. If you've got a real problem of being a member of an institution that doesn't let women in, I've got some advice for you. Come here, actually. Gather round, all of you. Simon Case, take a seat. Head of MI6, pull up a chair. If you don't want to be a member of an institution that doesn't let women join, don't join an institution that doesn't let women join. Something particularly pathetic about resigning after the truth has emerged. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. And that's why I like this story. And that's why I want you just simply to talk to me about how important you think it is. I should warn you now, if you're thinking of ringing in to say, oh, I'm a bloke, can I join the Women's Institute now? Then don't. Seriously, just save yourself tuppence or whatever it costs to make a phone call these days. That is such a crass comparison that if I even have to begin to explain to you why it's such a crass comparison, then I'm probably flogging a dead horse or wasting my time. I'm interested in this for quite a big reason. And that reason, I want you to imagine, is a hand of cards. And I can think of 5. You might be able to think of others. And those 5 things are, I think, all in my possession. A couple of them are variable. In fact, the final 2, which I'll work my way towards, are variable. But the first 3 are not. And this is about living in this country or this society, living in the Western society in 2024. These cards have oscillated in value over the course of your lifetime. These cards have oscillated in value over the course of history. But I think they are still more valuable than any other cards, even in 2024. In this society. So, white, card 1, straight, card 2, male, card 3. I don't want to say wealthy, but I will. I just mean comfortably off or well paid or whatever phrase you use. Solvent, we could say, but we'll go with wealthy and we'll go with posh. An awful lot of posh people don't think they're posh, but I would say one measure of that would be going to public school. So there are 5 privileges that still deliver advantage in this society. White, straight, male, wealthy, posh. Wealthy and posh are variables. White, straight and male are not in this context. And that's why I think this is really important. I think that an awful lot of people like me who possess all 5 of those cards, and I'll be honest with you, my wealthy and posh cards are pretty dog-eared, but my white, straight, male cards are box fresh. But a lot of people like me who possess all 5 of those cards find it hard to acknowledge sometimes that we actually enjoy any privilege whatsoever. White privilege is an unhappily complicated concept for many people, because to tell a white bloke on his uppers in Bermondsey that he enjoys more privilege than a black peer of the realm is obviously ridiculous in many, many ways. But if you think of it as a suit of cards, a hand of cards, then you can say, well, that is actually a privilege that you enjoy. But obviously, given the fact that you've not got the final two, you're neither wealthy nor posh, the algorithm of privilege is balanced against you. And that person over there who may be black actually enjoys more privileges than you do as a white person. But white privilege is still real. So if you think of privilege as an algorithm, a bit like a graphic equalizer, if that doesn't... No, you can get those on your iPhone now as well, can't you? So I'm not alienating the youth. A bit like a graphic, you can turn it up and down in various different points. My white privilege is not that high because I haven't got any wealth privilege. But white, straight, male, wealthy, posh gives you huge advantage still in society. Not as much as it used to. And I think as someone who's got all 5 of those cards, the one that I would have felt was less obvious, I think, would be the male one. It's obvious that being wealthy gives you advantage. It's obvious that being posh gives you advantage. It's obvious that being straight gives you advantage because you're never going to be the victim of a homophobic crime. And it's obvious that white gives you an advantage because you're never going to be a victim of racial discrimination. Right? But what advantage does being male give you in the modern world? You're never going to be you're unlikely to be a victim of sexual discrimination. You're a lot less likely to be a victim of sexual assault. There are some people out there who think that being a male is a disadvantage in the modern world, but they are often quite eccentric in their outlooks or very, very damaged by experience. The tough one is the male one, even for those of us who've got all 5 cards. And that's why I think that the Garrick Club story speaks to something quite significant and not exclusively, but perhaps peculiarly British. It is essentially saying, no, we're not just going to wave through the idea that being a bloke should automatically bestow advantage. There is nothing wrong with saying women can't come in too. And that, if you need the explanation, that's why saying, well, I can't join the Women's Institute is such a silly contribution to this conversation, because being a woman puts you at a disadvantage in our world for the reasons that we've just touched upon. So protecting the privilege does not apply to the WI. God, it sounded like a pre-prepared phrase, that, didn't it? Does not apply to the WI. And that's why I like the result, and I like the story, and I like the idea of opening up the phone lines, because, as I'm sure you'd agree, I haven't nailed it down. I'm talking about a curious mixture of suspicion and certainty. I suspect that this is more important than those of us who raised our eyebrows earlier at hearing it leading news bulletins or featuring in news bulletins of all the things going on in all the world today. Some editors and newsreaders considered this to be in the top 5. And I'm thinking actually perhaps it should be in England or in the United Kingdom in 2024. And I want you to tell me why. 0345 6060 973. Or, of course, why you think that it's not a big deal at all and that it isn't important. But I want to start, if I can, with explanations of why it is. The King, the Deputy Prime Minister, scores of leading lawyers, dozens of members of the House of Lords, 10 MPs, law firms, private equity companies, academics, senior journalists, and the head of the Independent Press Standards Organisation. All of these people, all of these men were happy to be in a club. And again, I don't know how helpful this is. This might be me indulging in one or two of the privileges that we've just listed, because I would say now that I wouldn't want to be a member of any institution that wouldn't let my wife in. I mean, I really wouldn't actually want to be the member of any institution that wouldn't let my wife in. But I don't know whether, I don't know what that says about me, except that I really like my wife. And also that I can take that to an institutional level built upon a concept of equality that is within our marriage, within our home. So the question I never ask, because it's too crass and simplistic, is this a big deal? 0345 6060973. I suppose if it's not, I'd need you to explain why it is being treated as such in our media and broader discourse today. 0345 6060973. And this idea that I think I've managed to put across a bit, this idea that it means something more than I've managed to properly articulate. What does it mean? What does the vote at the Garrick Club to abandon 193 years of not letting women join, what does it mean? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 11 is the time. A lot of people channeling Groucho Marx on this, who of course wouldn't be a member of any club that would let him join, which is quite a healthy attitude probably to adopt. I like this from Sue. Okay, I think Sue's done possibly a better job than I do in a lot fewer words. She says, I'm a woman and I honestly don't have an issue with it. I don't care about their posh little man club. Let them have it. Now, here's my problem. I am a man. So I can't now mansplain to Sue why she should care about this. Do you see what I mean? So you have to explain to Sue why she should care about this. And it's not the simple fact that it's a club exclusively for men. It's the fact that it's a club where the most powerful men in the country are happy to reside despite the fact that women can't join. They can go, don't get me wrong. You can get in. Didn't used to be able to go up the front stairs, but you can't join. And there used to be rooms you couldn't go into. I think there might still be some sort of guide to what, or rules about what table you can sit at and what table you can't. But I'm obsessed with this stuff. I'm obsessed. I mean, for me, class, I'm probably more obsessed with class than I am with race or gender or sexuality. But as I say, it's a 5-card trick. This seems to me to be important, but I can't explain to Sue why she should care more. So you can. Donna's in Taunton. Donna, what would you like to say?
Oh, I'd just like to say that the Garrick Club has grown up.
Well, I hope you're going to say a little bit more than that.
Well, I will. Yes, it's just ridiculous to argue that an all-male club and it's elitist. It's got people of a socio-economic group who are members, and there are plenty of women who are part of that genre in society who've only been told that they can't be members because of accident of birth, if you want to call it that. So
that's the historical cycle. I hadn't thought of it like that. So when it was founded 193 years ago, I mean, obviously I'm not in any way defending this, but it would have been close to unthinkable for a woman to inhabit any of the positions of influence that we've been gaily listing since 11 o'clock this morning.
Exactly, yeah.
So if the club is a club for influential human beings, then women should have been admitted decades ago.
Yes, and after all, who's the first influential human being you've ever come across in your life when you're born? Your mother. Well,
this is true. But that's a slightly different definition of influential from the one that we'd applied to describe sort of movers and shakers in it. So address Sue if you would then. When Sue says, I don't care about their posh little man club, let them have it. Why should she care?
Well, you don't have to join, but the ability to join is what is important.
Why? Because she doesn't think it is, and quite a few people will be, without signing up for a kind of anti-woke seminar or anything like that. They'll think, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Leave well alone. What is it that? And now I feel bad for picking on Sue, but what is it that Sue is missing that is so clear to so many?
Because you're being discriminated against.
Yes.
And legally, that's not a position that can be defended anymore. But you have the choice. But if you're prevented from having that choice, that's a different matter.
No. And well, Jackie in Skipton goes a little further. She says, well, women are shut out of an establishment where the powerful meet, then we remain powerless. And of course there are plenty of powerful women around, but here is a place you cannot go, or here is a status you cannot achieve. And it's a status that, when you look at the list of people who are members, is remarkable, actually. I heard Juliet Stevenson, the actor. There you go. That's part of the conversation that we're having. Talking about this today. And she was brilliant, pointing out that how can these people, directors, producers, actors, Benedict Cumberbatch is a member, Brian Cox is a member, the actor, not the physicist. How can you, as artists, subscribe to a school of thought that says women aren't allowed? I'd have thought it compromised your art in a way. Thank you, Donna. Alice is in Northwich. Alice, what would you like to say?
I think this is going to be important over time.
Yes.
And I think the essence is networking.
Go on.
Well, my daughter and son-in-law, if you don't mind me giving them as exemplars, they work in the same profession.
Yes.
They met at uni. They're both the same Russell Group. Good jobs, good degrees. Although actually, my daughter's was slightly better than my son-in-law's.
Okay.
Got good first jobs. Credit crunch came along. Son-in-law's firm fell apart at the seams. He was immediately scooped up by people he knew. Popped him into another nice job. Done very well. Now my daughter has also done. She's done okay, but it's been very tough. She's had to put up with sort of handsy men, and I had to sort of teach her how to, how you deal with them, And she's done okay. But my son-in-law still earns significantly more money than she earns. And I have to say, they're both sort of, it's full-time really, but it's sort of, they take a day off a week each, look after the children. So, they're very, very sort of equivalent. Do you know what I mean? I
do know what you mean, but there's still a level almost that your daughter can't access on account of being a woman.
Yeah, it's been easy.
And they're not members, just to be clear. The son-in-law...
In their 40s, and he's still better paid.
Yes, but just to be clear, he's not a member of the Garrick Club.
No, he's not. But the Garrick Club is it's sort of top network.
It's a bastion of what you're describing.
I beg your pardon?
It's a bastion of what you're describing. It's a bastion of know your place type social engineering. It's a place.
Things change over time. I was saying to your colleague. I worked in London for the civil service many decades ago now, and it was just assumed that when you got married, you'd leave the job. That was that was it. So that's changed. So I think it's going to take time, but hopefully, I think things will change.
They are changing. It's a little, and I think the fact that it was still quite tight, and it probably only came about because of the publication of that list of influential members, speaks to a sort of not a lethargy, but a kind of. What's the word I'm looking for when you're like a sort of laziness, where you know that something's wrong, but you're enjoying it too much to do anything about it, and they just needed to have their attention focused on the issue to realise what a problem it was. Because I've been there. I can't remember whether I told you this. I'm pretty sure I did tell you this when we were last talking about it. I went there, I had a splendid lunch there with two great friends of mine, one of whom is a member. And the bit I found odd, because I'm not a great believer in conviviality with people that you find politically repellent. I know this is probably me being childish, and I won't mention any names, but crikey on a bikey. People who I think have brought this country to its... People who feature in my book, How They Broke Britain. The idea that I could sort of be all convivial and chummy with them over a gin and tonic as if we're all sort of playing the same game just for different teams. I can't do that. I'm a bit weird in that way, but I can't do that. So that was the only thing that spoiled the club for me. To my shame, I didn't really register that women weren't allowed to join. There were women in the dining room that day, but I didn't really register that they weren't allowed to join. And that just sounds so weird, doesn't it, in 2024? I think complacency is the word I was looking for, Pauline. Thank you very much indeed. I like this crowdsourcing of my own vocabulary. Complacency, not a particularly... Or acquiescence, but I think complacency is a little better. 27 minutes after 11. And Alan in Edinburgh makes a point that is valid. Up to a point, it's valid. I never knew this club had such an impact on my life. Well, it doesn't have an impact on your life, Alan. I know you're being sarcastic. but it has an impact on the society in which you live. And as a man, it's an impact we are unlikely to feel. It is a bastion of sexual inequality. It is a totem, if you like, of discriminatory practice. It says at the very highest levels of our establishment that it's perfectly fine to exclude women. Now, if you are existing at lower levels of our society, that message will trickle down, that it is perfectly acceptable to exclude women or to I'm getting it now. It's all falling into place. Or to thank you, Alan. I know that wasn't your intention with your hilarious contribution, but that's exactly why is it relevant to Alan in Edinburgh? Because it speaks of a society in which sexual discrimination is not only accepted, but enshrined in the club and therefore the minds of the men that are in it, and the men that are in it are among the most powerful and influential in the country. So that is why it matters. And it's 11:30. That took my time. So now I can invite you to tell me why that's not true. Why does a bastion of sexual discrimination, an absolute mothership of sexual inequality, not have an effect upon the rest of society? Every judge, every actor, every spy, every civil servant walking through the door is effectively announcing to the world, I'm comfortable with practices, with principles, with institutions that treat women as second-class citizens. And if you're comfortable with that, then you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. One other brilliant text I got from Simon, who said, I think you're missing the gambling metaphor, James. The cards are great on their own, but much stronger as an accumulator. That's exactly right. So you've got all 5 of those cards, white, male, straight, wealthy, posh. Then you're born 3-0 up, aren't you, in life? And the tragedy continues to be the fact that so many people born 5-0 up, in fact, if you've got all 5 cards, you're born 5-0 up and they think that they've scored, it doesn't work because there's no word for a fifer. They've scored a fifer. They're born 5-0 up and they think they've scored a fifer. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sue is real. I can prove it. She's been back in touch. She says, I can't believe you read out my message. Thank you. I don't feel like you're picking on me at all. Just to add to my point, I don't feel it's discrimination. It's just a private social club, yes, for posh boys. But men should be able to have their own space, as should women. But it's not, is it, though? It's a place where the most influential people in society congregate. And essentially, it endorses or prolongs the myth, which is now a myth, it wasn't 193 years ago, that women can't sit among the most influential people in society. But as I say, I worry that I'm coming close to mansplaining at points in this conversation. A personal message and apology for Jerry in Doncaster. Mate, I'm so sorry that I've got an event in Sheffield on Friday night that's completely sold out. So there's not a lot I can do about that. Unless you can get on a train to London. I think there's still a few tickets left for the one I'm doing tonight with the How To Academy, where I'll be interviewed on stage by the inimitable Ian Dunt this evening in central London, not far from Tufton Street, actually. So if you can, Jerry, that's all I can think of. Or I'm in Dulwich on Saturday, but... No tickets left for the festival in Sheffield on Friday night. 11:35 is the time. Back to the Garrick Club, not literally, but conversationally. Steve's in Penn in Buckinghamshire. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yes. I'd like to say excluding women from clubs or anywhere else is absolutely outrageous, and I can't believe 21st century it still goes on. Excuse me, I've got COPD, so I'm struggling a bit.
Hey, you take your time. You take your time.
But moreover, I'm excluded from that club as well.
Yes.
And so are 99.9% of the male population.
Yes.
They're excluded. It's just a club for, I don't know, looking at possible future policies, with judges there, senior civil services there, MPs there. It's just like an old boys' House of Commons.
Well, what could we do? So, I mean, you're speaking, I think, to the 5 cards, aren't you? That I outlined, and you're pointing out that you might have 3 of them, but it's the last 2, the wealthy and posh, or the influential and solvent or rich. not having those two cards are probably still the biggest brakes upon social progress in this country.
Yes, and private schools, if you went to Eton or Harrow or something like that.
Do you know, I'm going to change out posh for public school educated, actually, I think, because I think that does a much better job of what I'm trying to articulate. Yeah. You're dead right.
So it's just about exclusion. I'm excluded, 99.9% of males excluded, and 100% of women were excluded. It just really sums up, I don't know, the state of our country, if you like. It's an old boys network. The old boys make the rules, and the rest of you just keep in your lanes.
You know your place. So it's a step in the right direction, but not a very big step, because...
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, which I'd completely missed. I wonder whether you need to be where you are to see what you see, and I need to be where I am to see what I see, and you can see more than I can on this, I think. Thank you, Steve. I'll read you this, actually. It's coming from someone who I know has operated at quite high levels in the civil service. As a former senior civil servant... Oh, there you go. He gives it away in the first line. As a former senior civil servant, I'd say the Garrick Club directly affects your life. Membership or even an invitation to lunch there from time to time gives private access to judges and to the most senior decision makers in government. If you're in, the potential effect is obvious. If you're not, you may not think it's obvious, but it is. You are among the 99.9999% recurring who don't enjoy that extraordinary advantage. Letting women become members, good though that is, will do nothing to change that. And he adds, your current caller, meaning Steve, is right. So that slightly flies in the face of me thinking Steve could only see with clarity what he could see because of where he sits, if you like, on the socio-economic ladder, because my correspondent there is a self-described former senior civil servant. Tony's in Greenock. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call. Looking forward to your show on next Friday in Glasgow.
So am I.
That'll be a good one.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I've got a lot on at the moment. You say that and I think, oh, lordy, why do I say yes to all these stuff? And then I'll get there, Tony, and I'll see your little smiling face. And I'll remember.
No, it's a hard audience to please in Glasgow.
Yeah, that's also true. But thank God it's going ahead, because it was under threat for a while, that whole festival, wasn't it? But we digress. Yeah. What do you want to say?
Yes. No, I think I agree with your point around it being a big issue, and I think it plays to a wider concern that sits under the surface, and that there are a lot of male-orientated clubs, societies, and in my case a charity that is populated by only males. We all call ourselves directors, and it's a charity that gives money to anyone who meets the need, male, female, any families, that sort of thing. So it's not discriminating in that way, but some of the younger directors are of a mind that we should be opening it up to females, because we acknowledge the value that they can bring to these sorts of things. But there are a lot of people, and some people who I call friends, and close friends, who are opposed to that, and say that if they ever had what they called a mixed dinner, because we have an annual dinner, if that ever became mixed, then they wouldn't go. Which I can't get my head around that attitude.
Nor can I, but I mean, they're not bad people, are they? As you say, they're your
not,
friends.
They're not bad people, but it's this thing of, I said to your producer, in Scotland we call it I-been. It's always been that way, so that's the way it's going to be.
Yes.
And
and some people find it a lot harder than others to accept that things not only don't have to be like that, but probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, and there's in other organisations I've been involved with locally, the women have joined, for example, the rugby club, and made a fantastic contribution to the club. The numbers have grown and they've been very proactive. They bring a lot to the table.
What would your friends say if you said why? You said, oh, if we made it mixed, I'd have to leave. And you said, but why? What would they say?
Because it's where we go to get away, and I could see a point, but I mean, they go to burn suppers every second day in January, and they're all male burn suppers as well.
I don't think I've ever found myself in a social setting where I thought, I wish
happy to get rid of me.
I wish there weren't any women here. Have you?
No. No. I say these things to my wife, and she says, "Well, I'm quite happy to see you go." To be honest,
and that is also. I mean, that speaks of domestic harmony as opposed to social harmony. So the lack of social harmony may contribute to your domestic harmony, or indeed your wife's. But you're right. As a national principle, it's a different proposition altogether. And in fact, picking up obliquely on the point you just made, because Max sent this before you made it, but I think they work together quite well. They challenge each other in a strange way, says Max. I think it was worse that women could be brought along but not join. They entirely lose the argument that they wanted to create a space for men, because it wasn't a space just for men. Women could be in it. They were just held back and not allowed to be there when they wanted to, or I'm now adding to Max's words, or indeed as full equals. And there it is. I don't argue with this from Alex. This is a very British discussion. I suspect there are things in America. There must be things in DC in particular at the top end of the WASP hierarchy. There must be American examples of this. I don't know enough about other cultures and societies to comment really, or to speculate, but I can't believe that, the kind of people that put Donald Trump in the White House, the funders and the backers, the big players, wouldn't also be supremely comfortable in the kind of environment that the Garrick Club represents. Tazeer is in East Dulwich. Tazeer, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. I thought I was contributing something very original, but your last two callers have kind of...
That's the perils of being on hold, isn't it?
Yeah. But what I would... My point was about the fact that these places, these clubs, exclude women, but also people based on their class and people based on their race. And that goes back forever. I mean, the gentlemen's clubs of London are beautiful.
They are.
I used to study them as an architect, and I used to show them to my students. We used to go there and get privileged access into places that not even the Queen could step into, even though it was on royal crown land, like the Athenaeum. And I believe that all of these clubs are I think the Reform Club was the first that allowed women, and then it's slowly been changing, and the Carlton Club, which is the Tory Club, had to put up Margaret Thatcher's picture on the wall. But I mean, I'm kind of going off on.
No, you're not. It's all relevant.
I'm saying it because it's rooted in our culture and our society. It's rooted in there, and then banks such as Coutts and Hawes, and then I mean, these clubs actually. The Garrick, I think, started out as an actors club.
Yes, it did. It's David Garrick, I think.
Yeah, and then the Groucho, which to some level I was involved in starting in the 80s. I worked with architects, and that was given the name, and that was for media and so on. And then I was a member of that.
Well, that was supposed to be an antidote to the kind of clubs that you're talking about.
Supposed to be, until the day, I think it was in the 90s, when I saw Clement Freud and David Owen walking down the steps, and I thought,
they should be at the Liberal Club. They should be at the Liberal Club.
The point being that it's... So I think this is a great step that the Garrick has been forced to take. However, it's so small.
Of course it is. I think that's become clear. Can I run something by you, actually? Because I've got a horrible feeling that this is... It's either quite an astute observation or it is incredibly patronising. Not to you, but there's a chance it could be both. But if people are listening to this going, this has got absolutely nothing to do with me, I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
They have been excluded from so much of society that they have lost the ability to appreciate that that's an injustice.
Yeah. I mean, it is irrelevant. I agree. I think it's irrelevant to the vast majority of people in this country. And I'll tell you, even those that find themselves somewhere in between, I guess like me in a way, growing up here on the edge, kind of because of where I studied and so on, finding myself on the edges of that area. And then, okay, this is a personal example, and I won't mention any names of schools and so on, but a school that private school that my son went to, and then found very quickly in 1 year how he was the butt and on the edge of stuff, and there was no reason. There was no reason
It's code. There's codes all over the place.
Mentality or the herd mentality.
Yeah, and you use these things. You use these. I don't even want to say accomplishments. They're certainly not accomplishments. It's attributes, badges. You know, sometimes it's language, the way that certain words are pronounced. What school did you go to? What college were you at your university? All of these questions are designed to shave people away until what you're left with is the most entitled section of society. And so just because you got shaved away 1,000 shaves ago doesn't mean you shouldn't be interested in the shaving away of women, incredibly high-achieving, famous, successful women who were not allowed to join this club. It's I'm nearly there. I've nearly got it in a really neat little pithy nutshell, but I'm not there yet. Jazeera has helped. Thank you. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51. I've got quite an important little interview to play to you shortly, which looks at a cause, a really important cause that you may not have thought about much, but hopefully you will now. After that, there may be time for another call or two, but if there isn't, then Natasha Clark will be with us to cast an eye over PMQs, which is about to unfold in the House of Commons. After that, I got it's a new tradition that we're developing of doing interviews on Wednesdays, like all the other radio shows do every day. We're kind of getting interesting people. Actually, we're getting interesting people onto the programme who possibly have stories to tell that aren't getting the coverage they might deserve in a normal universe. And one involves the decision by the Israeli cabinet to vote unanimously to remove Al Jazeera from the country altogether. That's certainly my understanding of the issue, but who better to talk to than the managing editor of the whole operation, which we will be doing after 12:30, and Nick Davies, staying with journalism. Nick Davies is the journalist who blew the lid off the phone hacking scandal. Arguably, without him, there never would have been a Leveson 1 or indeed a Leveson 2 for Theresa May to shamefully abandon. But he's back and with revelations and stories that are arguably even more shocking than the original. So he'll be talking us through some of what he has discovered as well before 1 o'clock today. But before all of that, my personal thanks to the Royal National Institute of Blind People. I caught up with their Director of Customer Voice at the charity, David Aldwinkle, about the challenges faced by the blind and partially sighted community, and crucially, what we can all do to offer more support. David, we've all seen the RNIB logo and some of the fundraising. Can you just tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure, James. RNIB is a charity, Royal National Institute for Blind People. We've been around for more than 150 years, so we're one of the oldest organisations in the country, one of the oldest charities in the world. And our reason for being has always been to try and improve the lives of people who live with little or no sight. That ranges these days from we run helpline and advice line for people, for friends and family. We work with people at the point where they're diagnosed with sight loss. And we also try to work increasingly with members of the general public or people at government or employers to try and change situations so that they become easier and more inclusive for people who live with sight loss.
So, I mean, regardless of how much better life might be for blind or partially sighted people today compared to 150 years ago, in a way, your work is never done. So tell us some of the issues, very 2024 issues that blind and partially sighted people might face, perhaps at work.
The horizon is always running away from us. So in work, the vast majority of people of working age with sight loss are out of work. Compared to the general public, far less likely to be in work, and actually when you compare with other people with disabilities. And we think the two kind of key drivers for that are accessibility in the workplace. So if you imagine using your computer, me as a visually impaired person, I use an adapted machine so that my machine speaks to me, it blows the text up very large. Once I have that in place, perfectly capable of doing the role as well, if not better than other people. And then you have, I suppose, employers' understanding in the workplace. There are a lot of assumptions about what it means to be blind or partially sighted, and that sort of impinges on people's willingness to offer jobs. They see it sort of taking a risk, and those things have been true for years. They are true now, and they will continue to be true as workplaces evolve. We work hard with employers to try and get them ready for receiving applications from people with sight loss, and for keeping people in work, because a lot of people lose their sight while they're in work and then feel they have to leave their job rather than finding the adaptations and getting the help they need to stay in work and stay productive.
What can we do? What can my listeners and I do to help support RNIB?
One of the things we're really keen on now, or we really want to push, is around the general public's understanding and just maybe a little bit of thoughtfulness. We know the public in general are supportive and are helpful, but we also know that there's quite a lot of awkwardness around either approaching or offering to help someone with sight loss. I think in a recent survey, more than 60% of the population thought that someone would help somebody who was blind, but also said that they felt awkward and uncomfortable about doing it. So we're launching a campaign of being helpful. We'd like people to pick up the idea that just a few kind of questions, or a little, hello, do you need any help type question, can make a real difference to someone's life and their ability to get on, particularly if they're getting around, if they're on transport or going places. So we are asking everybody to download our Be Helpful guide from our website, which gives you some really simple hints, tips, ways of engaging in a conversation and just getting over that barrier of being really helpful and making a difference to somebody's life.
I'll download that as soon as we finish talking. But in the meantime, tell me about touching. How do you know that I'm talking to you if you're on a tube, train or a bus and I'm wondering whether you want some help getting off?
Well, a lot of people sort of don't realise that the vast majority of even people who use a cane or a guide dog, or even wear the sort of the stereotypical dark glasses, do actually have some useful vision. Like myself, I'm registered blind, but I have enough vision that I would know, if someone's voice is coming directed at you, you would know. And if somebody's saying, hello, do you need any help? We tend to know.
Chances are.
You tend to sense it. There is a sense that says, I know you're talking to me. These things are all very personal, and this kind of, you do understand why people feel awkward, but a little touch on the elbow and then the question is perfectly fine. What we find, though, is with what we hear from a lot of blind and partially sighted people, and I've experienced this myself, is that sometimes people in their willingness to help get a little bit too eager and maybe will grab your arm and start walking with you,
right.
And put yourself in that position, James. You wouldn't want somebody doing that to you.
Absolutely.
And you wouldn't want that. And whilst we know people are being helpful, trying to be helpful doing that, it can really sort of spike levels of anxiety, or kind of a sense that you're being kind of pulled around and manhandled, and you're not really quite being treated like a sort of a civilized adult.
Exactly
in
that.
these situations. Yeah.
Finally, David, how easy is it for people who are blind and or partially sighted to connect with each other?
Well, it is one of the things we hear from people all the time, that there's a sense that you're doing this on your own when you get a diagnosis. It's very difficult. It's unusual that people know somebody else who've lost their sight, apart from maybe an elderly relative. And a lot of the time, people don't see themselves as connected to that sort of age group. But even in that age group, people still have a sense that they're on their own doing it. So it's really important that they can connect. We've got a number of ways that people can do it. Through RNIB, we have Facebook groups across the country with, I think, around 20,000 people on there. And even if it's just a little question about how do you do this, or have you had experience of that, there's usually someone there who will be able to kind of have a bit of experience that they can share. Equally, people can contact RNIB's helpline, and there'll be people on there who can give advice straight away, but also can help connect with others in similar experiences. We have groups, what we call talk and support, where people kind of share those experiences and find people with common interests as well. But also there are local societies across the country who can help you find like-minded people. And there are also activity groups, like there's a lot of sports clubs for blind and partially sighted people where people can find a connection as well.
Thank you, David. And thank you, rnib.org, where you can, of course, also download that Be Helpful guide to find out, well, how you can be more helpful. It is coming up to 12 noon, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQs will be upon us, probably a little quicker than usual, because the time is, as I mentioned, already close to noon. But Natasha Clark is here. What do you reckon? What's going to happen today?
Well, it's a bit of an open goal for Keir Starmer after last week's local elections, isn't it?
Up to a point.
I'd like to expect that would be...
But he's not a traditional...
It's true, he sometimes goes for curveballs, doesn't he? Well, The other story, which I thought he might go on, was prisons, which he's gone on before, about them letting prisoners out even earlier. The border chaos that we saw last night with borders shut for several hours, that was really a good one to whack the Tories with as well. And obviously our own interview with Robert Jenrick earlier saying let's put Farage back in the Tory party would be another very much open goal for Keir Starmer
He's used that before. He likes that.
He does like that, sort of allying the Tory party with them being a far-right party. He likes to discuss that, and he's used it with the Liz Truss before, so that could be
and they
an
wouldn't
option.
do that without some arithmetic, would they? Without either focus grouping or polling. And you're thinking of the kind of Conservative who would be repelled by Farage. That's who he's speaking to, really, when he's saying, look what your party has turned into.
Exactly. He's trying to say, I'm different to the Conservative Party, the Labour Party has changed, and here's why, and trying to put some, many of his critics in his own party think that he's not, and that his Labour leadership is not different enough. So I think that does work as quite an effective argument to say, look, you say that the Tories and Labour are two sides of the same coin, but actually there is clear water between us, and he doesn't want to be associated with the likes of the Suella Bravmans or the Robert Jenricks or the Liz Trusses of the Conservative Party, and I think a lot of voters will resonate with that.
The reason why I mentioned that it's not a path he obviously goes down, for people wondering what on earth I'm gibbering on about, he doesn't do the Punch and Judy at PMQs as enthusiastically or as often as other leaders have done. You could perhaps have said the same about Jeremy Corbyn, who went down different avenues. But what's happened?
Can I bring you some breaking news?
Well, you better now.
Tory MP Natalie Elphicke appears to be sitting on the Labour benches. A statement from Natalie Elphicke MP has just joined. She is defecting to the Labour Party.
Just before PMQs.
Oh, you couldn't make it up, could you?
They're great optics.
11:59.
I get them all mixed up with each other.
Natalie Elphicke is
she's
the MP
one that
for
shouts
Dover.
at boats down in Dover.
She does, yes.
So it's quite an odd fit for the Labour Party.
That's fun.
But she comes
from
the right. Don't
stunning.
swear, whatever you do. But she comes from the right of the party, doesn't she?
Yes, she's from the right of the party.
And she got the seat after her ex-husband departed in acrimonious circumstances.
Yes, Charlie Elphicke, the very naughty Tory.
This gets better. So she got parachuted in by a supine local association, and now she's turned around and treated them with the same contempt that the voters of Dover have long felt she treated them.
This is really going to hurt the PM because...
And he'll know, will he?
Well, he will know because she's sat on the other side of the chamber.
Thank you for pointing that out.
It'll be staring
It's a bit what you might call a visual aid.
It will be. This will really hurt, I think. This is
and
somebody...
will he pick it up? Will he go in on that? Because... Last week he did. The last week's fella just sat there looking very stony-faced.
He didn't look very happy, did he, to have a defection on his
I don't know how helpful this one is. Can you say no to someone who wants to defect?
Why would you do that?
Well, because...
It shows what Keir Starmer wants to be doing is bringing over Conservatives and Conservative voters over into his party, showing that he's on course for an election win and he's winning people over.
We need to move on, she writes, from the broken promises of Rishi Sunak's tired and chaotic government. Britain needs a government that will build a future of hope, optimism, opportunity and fairness, a Britain everyone can be part of, that will make the most of the opportunities that lie ahead. That's why it's time for change, time for a Labour government led by Keir Starmer. The general election cannot come soon enough.
She's an OBE.
She is an OBE.
I
think that's left us both a little bit nonplussed.
I'm stunned.
But she is definitely one of the people that shouts at boats.
This is great.
Well, we shall see. So will he open with that? And the other thing I was going to say, when I was taking the Punch and Judy points, is that he does quite like demanding a general election, because I think that plays quite well on the news bulletins. Is why can't we have a general election? Could Labour deselect her? I mean, does the Labour constituency, Labour Party in Dover, not have something to say about this? Presumably there's a candidate already lined up to fight the seat.
There is. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there is already a Labour candidate who's, I think he's
right, let's cross live. We'll come back to this shortly.
Mr. Speaker, can I warmly welcome the new member for Blackpool South? After the representation that fine town has had recently, it's good to know they've got a proper champion back at last. Can I also warmly welcome the new Labour MP for Dover to these benches? Mr. Speaker, if 1 week a Tory MP who's also a doctor says the Prime Minister can't be trusted with the NHS and joins Labour, and the next week the Tory MP for Dover, on the front line of the small boats crisis, says the Prime Minister cannot be trusted with our borders and joins Labour, what is the point of this failed government staggering on?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I actually join him in welcoming his newest MP for Blackpool? I must say he looks a lot happier than the member who was sitting there last week. But let me also join with him. And let me join with him in congratulating all new and paying tribute to all former councillors, PCCs and mayors across the country. I hope his new ones do him as proud as I am of all of mine, Mr. Speaker. Great leaders like Andy Street, who leave behind a strong legacy of more homes, more jobs and more investment, in sharp contrast to the legacy left by the last Labour government, which was a letter joking that there was no money left.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in addition to losing 2 Tory MPs in 2 weeks, the Prime Minister's been on the receiving end of some of the biggest by-election swings in history. He's also lost 1,500 Tory councillors, half of his party's mayors, and a leadership election to a lettuce. How many more times do the public and his own MPs need to reject him before he takes the hint?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this time last year I reminded him of some advice, actually, from his own mentor, Tony Blair, who had said at the time, he can be as cocky as he likes about local elections, but come a general election, it's policy that counts, Mr. Speaker. Now, one year on from that advice, what has he managed? £28 billion of tax rises, 70 new business regulations, 30 U-turns, and a deputy leader under a police investigation.
Well, I'm surprised he brought up a police investigation. I think his record is played 1, actually 2, the seatbelt as well. Played 2, lost 2 in relation to police investigations. But it's the same. The public keep telling him, the voters tell him it's not good enough. Instead of listening, he keeps telling them everything's fine if only they'd realise his greatness. He just doesn't get it. But at least after Thursday night, Mr. Speaker, he can go to the many places that he calls home and enjoy the fruits of his success. In Southampton or Downing Street, he's got great Labour councils. At his mansion in Richmond, he can enjoy a brand new Labour mayor of North Yorkshire. And at his pad in Kensington, he can celebrate a historic 3rd term for the Mayor of London. Now that he too can enjoy the benefits of this changed Labour Party, is he really still in such a hurry to get back to California?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must say I was of course surprised to see the honourable gentleman in North Yorkshire, but probably not as surprised as he was when he realised he couldn't take the tube there, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell him that the people of North Yorkshire believe in hard work, secure borders, lower taxes, and straight-talking common sense, Mr. Speaker. They're not going to get any of that from a virtue-signalling lawyer from North London.
Well, it was great to be in Northallerton, where they just voted to reject the Prime Minister's proposition. Mr. Speaker, he's finally found something in common with the British public. No matter where he calls home, all his neighbours are backing this changed Labour Party. And they keep rejecting him because they have sussed him out. They know there's nothing behind the boasts, the gimmicks, the smug smile. He's a dodgy salesman, desperate to sell them a dud. Now, Mr. Speaker, 16 days ago, when he held a press conference claiming victory on Rwanda, he said the next few weeks will be about action. People want deeds, not words. So let's test that. How many small boat crossings have there been since he said that 16 days ago?
Mr. Speaker, actually, just before we go on to that, he talked about a changed Labour Party. That's important because he talked about a changed Labour Party. He talks about it a lot. But just this morning, and he also talked about his new mayor in London. So just this morning, we've learned that the Labour mayor in London believes, and I quote, that there is an equivalence between the brutal terrorist attack of Hamas and Israel defending itself. And let me be crystal clear. there is absolutely no equivalence between a terrorist coup and a democratic state. So can I ask him now, will he take this opportunity to demonstrate that Labour Party has changed? And will he condemn those comments from the Labour mayor?
Well, I know that was the last run out before the general election, but he's getting ahead of himself in asking me questions. But Mr. Speaker, I notice he didn't even attempt to answer the question. He knows the answer. Since he claimed victory 16 days ago, there have been a staggering 2,400 small boat crossings. 2,400! That's a gimmick, not a deterrent. And those 2,400 will be added to the Tories' asylum perma-backlog, which is forecast to rise to 100,000 by the end of this year. Now, the Prime Minister pretends he will remove them all to Rwanda. But Rwanda can only take a few hundred a year. Yeah. At that rate, the Prime Minister's grand plan would take over 300 years to remove them all. Mr. Speaker, that's tens of thousands of people with their claims going unprocessed, who are going to be here for their entire lifetime living in hotels at the taxpayers' expense. It is absurd to call that anything other than an amnesty handed to them by the Tory party, isn't it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he had the opportunity to condemn the comments of his mayor, a mayor who said that there is an equivalence between Hamas and Israel. He did not do that, and everyone will see what that is. That is the Change Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, right there. But since I became Prime Minister, small boat crossings are down by a third. That's because we've doubled NCA funding, increased enforcement rates, closed bank accounts, deported 24,000 people, processed more claims, and, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to border control, there is a crucial difference between us. We want secure borders, he's happy with open borders.
Mr. Speaker, the whole country knows that removing less than 1% of asylum seekers isn't stopping the boats, it's granting an amnesty, a Tory amnesty. But if he thinks the voters are wrong, if he thinks his own MPs joining the Labour Party are wrong, if he thinks anyone believes any of the nonsense that he spouts, why doesn't he put it to the test and call a general election?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about removing people. This is a person who campaigned to stop the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker. It shows how out of touch his values are with the British people. But, Mr. Speaker, it's yet another week where we hear nothing about his plan to do anything on the issues that matter to the country. Meanwhile, we're getting on, reforming welfare and getting people into work. He opposes it. We're controlling migration, legal and illegal. He opposes it. And as we heard, Mr. Speaker, we are boosting defence spending to strengthen our country. He opposes it, and that's the difference. He snipes from the sidelines. The Conservatives are building a brighter future.
When it comes to small boat crossings, there's a lot of talk of human rights. But surely the only human right and life that matters is the life of children who are being taken across the Channel. In this respect, will the government now do the only thing that will actually be a real deterrence, and that is to arrest and detain all those who land illegally on our shores and then offshore them promptly, so that once and for all we can save lives and end this cruel and callous trade?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right that these crossings are incredibly dangerous and they risk people's lives. Just weeks ago, a 7-year-old girl died attempting the crossing, and that's why, as a matter of basic compassion, we must do everything we can to break the cycle of the criminal gangs. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, you need a deterrent. That's what the National Crime Agency say. That's how we dealt with illegal migrants from Albania, because it's only by removing people who shouldn't be here that we remove the reason for them to come in the first place. And that is how we'll control our borders. And it's clear that it's only this party that not only has a plan to stop the boats, but has a plan to stop the tragic loss of life in the Channel too.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by also congratulating the fantastic John Swinney on becoming Scotland's first Minister, our opponents should be careful, very careful what they wish for. Mr. Speaker, as we await the imminent Israeli incursion into Rafah, where 1.2 million people are sheltering, including 600,000 children, it has been reported that the United States has paused an arms shipment to Israel. The UK will now follow suit, won't it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman may not realise, but the UK government doesn't itself directly provide arms or ship arms to Israel. And when it comes to the situation in Rafah, I've been very clear that we are deeply concerned about a full military incursion of Rafah, given the devastating humanitarian impact. I've made that position and point specifically to Prime Minister Netanyahu whenever we've spoken, and will continue to urge all sides to focus on the negotiations at hand, to bring about a pause in the conflict, to release hostages and get more aid in.
Stephen Flynn. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. The confidence that Israel has shown in its military ambitions in Rafah stems from the silence which has been shown from its allies on the front benches in this place and indeed elsewhere across the world. Now we all know that UK arms and tech is supporting Israel's activities in Gaza and will be used in any attack on Rafah. Knowing that and the devastation which is going to occur, surely the time has come to end our complicity and to halt arms sales to Israel.
Mr. Speaker, of course we take our defence export responsibilities extremely seriously, and that's why we operate one of the most robust licensing control regimes anywhere in the world. We periodically review advice on Israel's commitment to international humanitarian law, and ministers always act in accordance with that advice. And that is crystal clear for the House to understand. Our position with regard to export licences following the most recent assessment is unchanged, and I know that he will join me in urging all parties to engage in the negotiations that are happening so we can see a pause in fighting, to get more aid in, hostages out, and then bring about a sustainable ceasefire to this conflict.
Martin Bickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in rural villages and on the fringes
17 minutes after 12 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. For reasons that I shall leave you to speculate on, I just Googled the phrase worst ever PMQs to see what might come up. And we'll explore that a little further after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12, welcome back to reality, apparently. I thought, Natasha Clark, we would be spending a few moments discussing the resignation, I don't know what you'd call, withdrawal of Monty Panesar, famous cricketer, of course, who unexpectedly popped up on George Galloway's ticket. But he's withdrawn as a general election candidate.
One for another day.
For the work. So that's one for another day, because you were in a state of borderline shock before PMQ
I was in a bit
started.
Of a flap.
Correctly so. But to address it for people who don't follow politics as closely as you do, and that includes me, actually, because I needed to clarify a couple of things with you during the break. Why on earth are Labour accepting this Tory? They should let her become an independent and put up a decent Labour candidate at the election, not this ship jumper who propped up the Johnson government. And Rob speaks for many when he asks that question.
Has Mike Tapp been texting you already?
I haven't heard from Mike Tapp, but he was certainly expecting to fight Dover and Deal for the Labour Party at some point between now and Christmas. So go on, why?
Look, this is... You heard Keir Starmer set out exactly why he's done this in PMQs when he introduced Natalie Elphicke, who it sounds like absolutely stunned the chamber when she walked in and sat behind him at Prime Minister's Questions just a few minutes ago. But for him, it's why he's able to essentially now launch a two-pronged attack on the Conservative Party by saying you've got Dan Poulter leaving over the NHS, and now you've got Natalie Elphicke, a hardline, staunch Conservative MP from the town of Dover and Deal, leaving over immigration, borders and boats, and also housing as well, another key Labour battleground that I'm sure they want to make the most of. And look, this defection statement from her is absolutely seething. I think the bit I wanted to pick out was where she said, the elected Prime Minister was ousted in a coup led by the unelected Rishi Sunak. Like, this is scathing stuff from a Conservative MP. And we were discussing off air whether this might be a tactical move from her in an attempt to hold on to her seat in the onslaught of a Labour advance. And of course, that will go through any MP's head at the moment when they're thinking about what to do in the upcoming election. Just checked her majority. It's about 12,000. So probably on the borderline of, could potentially be losing her seat and may be using this as an attempt to try and hang on to it. But, this really is something
she might
spectacular.
not be standing. We have to bear that in mind. This might be a coup de grace.
I don't believe her statement has mentioned that she's going to step down, like Dan Poulter did when he announced that his defection.
But equally it hasn't stated. I mean, she might want to have conversations. So I'm just saying, I'm just being uncharacteristically cautious.
She's calling for a general election.
Yeah, which suggests she wants to fight
She wants to fight and stand it. But to have somebody who's, regularly been assaulting Rishi Sunak on the right of his party for so long and not doing enough on small boats, and she's talking about small boats to biosecurity. Rishi Sunak's government is now failing to keep our borders safe and secure. And the idea that she now thinks Rishi Sunak is not the one to do that and that Keir Starmer is the one to keep our borders safe will be such a strong argument that the Labour Party couldn't have resisted it.
But, the point... Yes, exactly that, is that the short-term political arithmetic of a defection outweighs any question marks that may hang over either Natalie Elphick's suitability to be admitted into the Labour Party or her electability on any ticket at all. So the people of Dover and Deal perhaps pushed into the back seat when the priorities of the Parliamentary Labour Party...
And 2 in 2 weeks, of course. Let's not forget.
2 for 2.
So
what are the odds
on
that? It's 3 in a row, going for the hat
trick.
Well,
we all just sort of laughed when there were suggestions that more were to follow, because usually politicians say this all the time. They rarely ever follow through with something like this. But I'm sure Keir Starmer will be buoyed by this, and I'm sure there will be more talks going on.
It could be 3 for 3.
But yes, it's not what Rishi Sunak wants on the aftermath of bruising local election results.
Which brings us
another
to
MP defect.
No. Which brings us to, I think we both Googled the worst PMQs ever during the interim of that. Quite a few of the professional commentators have already had their say. He would have been so completely rattled by the defection. He looked it and he sounded it, and if anyone not fully across the rubric of PMQs, you never ask the leader of the opposition a question. You throw it in but to actually be reduced not only to citing that letter that was left in the Treasury, the joke stroke tradition of saying there isn't any money left, started, I think, by the Conservative Chancellor Reginald Maudling. That's desperate. He didn't break glass and release Jeremy Corbyn, which he often does when he's desperate, probably because he was too rattled even to remember to reach for that desperate lever.
The PM believes that he spends too much time preparing for Prime Minister's questions. He believes that it's essentially, I think, a waste of some of his time. And I think, you can't prepare for this, can you? You can't prepare for somebody literally defecting seconds before you come on. It's not something that you would have known. And it's not something you can prepare for. And he was rightly rattled throughout the entire thing. He was on the back foot. He looked a bit like a rabbit stuck in the headlights,
and there's nowhere to hide, is there? Because I'm not a normal human being, Natasha, as you've probably been here long enough now to have established this. So I quite like standing up in front of rooms full of people and talking. And
strange man.
For most people, even the thought of a best man speech can be absolutely terrifying. People find it is one of the most... But so everyone has got a vague idea of what it's like, even if it was confined to an anxiety dream, when you can't get away, but your heart is going at 10 to the dove, and you're swallowing in the wrong places, your nerves, the adrenaline is flooding through your body, filling it with fight or flight type responses, which are not appropriate at the time.
That sounds like me half an hour ago.
and that is exactly what. Yeah, but that was excitement. That wasn't terror. And he was terrified.
Yeah, and he couldn't get away. And he still can't.
Worst you've ever seen?
Not worst PMQs from him. It's up there with one of the worst I think we've seen from Rishi. Yes, I think they've run out of road. They've run out of things to say. He's slinging the same old insults back at him. The same old bad jokes coming up again and again. And I just don't think it's landing. The mud isn't sticking anymore.
I think it was John Harris of The Guardian saying he just died on his feet in the House of Commons, which is pretty close to the truth, isn't it? Natalie Elphick, I couldn't remember what it was. It was this.
You voted for fire and rehire. You voted for fire and rehire. You voted for fire and rehire. Shame on you. Shame on you! Shame on you!
I will be marching for the jobs in Dover, for the people of Dover, and for the disgusting behaviour of P&O and DP World.
The steel workers, the coal miners, the shipbuilders, everybody.
I am here for the people of Dover.
No, you're not. That sounded like Monty Python. We cut that a bit too early. What did he say? Probably swore. That was when she tried to join the protest over the P&O sackings from a few years ago, a couple of years ago, I think March 22. And it was pointed out by the crowd that she'd actually voted against Labour's attempts to put a stop to precisely the sort of fire and hire practices or not precisely actually, to the sort of fire and rehire practices that P&O were employing. So she's not destined to become a particularly sparkly jewel in the crown of the Parliamentary Labour Party. But as I keep trying to stress, it doesn't matter. A defection is not counted according to who has defected, but the defection itself is the prize.
Yes, and it's a huge blow for the Prime Minister to lose one of his MPs, not just because of parliamentary arithmetic, where we're losing Tory MPs like flies at the moment in the House of Commons, which makes him passing any more legislation even more difficult in the days and weeks to come as we tick down to that general election. Of course, it's a huge embarrassment, and it just gives Keir Starmer yet another stick to batten with. So I imagine they'll run with this one. Although saying that, this is someone I think slightly more well known than Dan Poulter, I think it's fair to say, within the Conservative.
Not necessarily for good
Party.
Reasons. I mean, partly because her husband left in such unsavoury circumstances,
Partly
and
so.
she subsequently, I think, got into trouble for defending him. But anyway, all of that will no doubt be rehearsed in the Tory newspapers tomorrow as they mount a massive rearguard action to pretend that they don't really mind at all.
I can't wait to see the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting this week. It's going to be a fiery one.
There's going to be some unhappy people.
Poor Mike Tapp, he's going to be devastated.
We need to keep an eye on that because there's still a slim chance she won't get to fight the seat, but it's unlikely she'd have agreed. If she wanted to, she would not have defected unless she was promised that she could.
Exactly, that's exactly the way it would work.
Oh, my days.
It was exciting, wasn't it?
It was. It's not over yet. Just a word on Stephen Flynn. He is owning Gaza from the point of view of people that are unhappy with the way Israel is conducting itself, with the exception of Sadiq Khan, which again the Prime Minister reached for rather desperately, just to clarify the accusation that he was equating Israel's right to defend itself with the Hamas terror attack. What Sadiq Khan actually did was point out that 14,000 children have been killed by the IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu's policies, and that he is capable of condemning both that and the murders undertaken, the 1,200 murders of Israeli civilians undertaken by Hamas on October the 7th. But that's not a Labour MP. That's a Labour mayor. A Labour mayor now freed really as a third-term mayor, an unprecedented position to be in, freed from any real party attachment, isn't it? He's become a politician independent almost, I think, of the main party line. So he can say that. But Stephen Flynn is owning it for the SNP. Criticism of Israel, calls for cessation of arms sales, and that will be resonating with an awful lot of people that Keir Starmer, I think, has decided he doesn't need to worry about.
Potentially, although we've had a little bit of humility from the Labour Party in the last few days, acknowledging that some of their communities have not been voting for them over the issue of Israel and Gaza. And I thought, actually, Pat McFadden was very interesting on Lewis Goodall's show on Sunday, where he admitted that the Labour Party are looking at a big offer, something to do with an offer for the Palestinian people as part of their Labour manifesto. And we don't know what that looks like yet.
Strong.
But that would be something that I think, would reach out to those communities that may be losing Labour. So that's a really interesting development I think we will see. But yes, look, you see it from the two sides of the coin from the local election result. You've got on one hand Keir Starmer moving away from those, losing some of those votes from the Greens and from the Independents. But then on the other side, you've got Sadiq Khan hoovering them all up in order to defeat Susan two very different.
Birmingham, possibly even more significant in that equation. Actually, the defeat for Andy Street in Birmingham, possibly even more significant. Okay, should we have a little bet?
Go on. I'm not a betting woman. I've told you this
really
before.
A betting man. I had a nightmare on the snooker this year.
Go on, try me.
It puts me off for another year. Actually, it was that bad. A third defection next Wednesday. Just yes or no?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no.
I'll say yes then.
Go on then. How much are we betting?
50p? 52p.
Why 52?
Come on. Think about the most...
48?
Yes.
Okay. That's not really enough for me to want to make this bet, to be honest.
Well, I don't want to embarrass you.
Okay.
It's 12:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:36 is the time. This is nice from Will. Thank you. You and Natasha should have longer segments together. You're a great duo. I hope she's as delighted to see that as I am, Will. But after she left the studio, Jim Pickard of the Financial Times, who is a journalist I hold in high esteem, has tweeted that Natalie Elphicke is not going to be fighting Dover and Deal for the Labour Party at the next election. She is, in fact, stepping down, which means that Mike Tapp, probably the most Googled man in the country at the moment, or certainly the most Googled man in politics over the course of the last 36 minutes, he will still be the candidate, which seems to at least have natural justice. And it means it's a win-win-win for Labour. So even people unhappy, perhaps, about the calibre of the candidate who's crossed the floor can be reassured by the apparent fact that she will not actually be wearing Labour rosettes come the revolution, come the general election, and will instead, it will still be a seat that is fought by Mike Tapp. So I think that heads off some of the criticism that Keir Starmer might have had heading his way. I could, of course, be wrong. Nick Davis is a name that you should know. He is the investigative journalist, formerly of The Guardian, who uncovered the phone hacking scandal. He's probably too modest to take full credit for it, but history has attested that without him, it's unlikely that much of this scandal would ever have seen the light of day. And he's been back in action lately, writing chiefly for Prospect magazine and their website, because there is I believe the technical term is a shed load of new evidence before the court. And Nick joins us now. Nick, can we begin with why? What has prompted this new sort of seam of evidence to be brought into the public space?
Okay, so since the whole thing blew up 10 years ago, something like 2,000 people have sued the Murdoch company and also the Mirror Group titles and the Daily Mail for unlawful information gathering. Now, we know that almost nobody is rich enough to go to full trial. Prince Harry's almost the only guy who's made it all the way to the end of the course. But all these people get the court to order the newspaper companies to disclose internal information that they may be holding on them, like the invoices that show which private investigators were hired to follow them, or emails that were written about them, or crucially, call data, phone calls coming out of Murdoch HQ in East London into the mobile phones of their targets. And all sorts of extraordinary new stuff has emerged in this evidence. And Fleet Street, for its own weird and selfish reasons, hasn't covered it. So I spent weeks doing this mighty mosaic, taking these little fragments of evidence and sticking them together. And so, for example, there's an amazing picture that emerges which suggests that while we all know that various journalists were hacking into the phones of people to get stories about their private lives, their sex lives, over on the other side of the Murdoch building, on the commercial side, somebody was hacking into the mobile phones of politicians, not for stories, as far as we can gather, but in order to gather intelligence which would help the Murdoch Corporation to make a lot of money, because politicians are often in the way in terms of regulation. And some of this is breathtaking in its arrogance. So, for example, you go back to July 2011, the Millie Dowler story in The Guardian, the whole thing breaks out in chaos. In Westminster, the Media Select Committee in the House of Commons have already been investigating this, and they decide to call Rupert Murdoch and his son James as witnesses. And initially, the two Murdochs said, actually, we're too busy. So then a Labour MP, Paul Farrelly, decided to actually summons them, to send a sergeant at arms, say, you come and talk to us, otherwise you end up in a dungeon. Right. When Farrelly was preparing to move that motion, and subsequently discussing what questions to ask the two Murdochs, we can now see 14 completely unexplained calls coming from Murdoch HQ into Paul Farrelly's mobile phone. And these are not calls from journalists. Journalists who want to talk to someone like Paul Farrelly will end up with a press officer. If they do get through to the politician, the conversation's going to go on for 15 or 20 minutes. It's a question, it's another question. These are calls that last a minute or two. And they're not coming from where the political journalists are in Westminster. It's Murdoch HQ.
So you know that from the landlines that have made the calls from literally the physical geographical location of the lines in the building.
It's actually slightly interesting because if you make a call out of Murdoch HQ directly, your extension number will turn up on the receiving person's phone. But there is an alternative. There's what they call the hub number. If you direct your call through that, the caller can see it's coming from the Murdoch building, but they can't see who's making it. So there is no doubt at all that these calls are coming from the Murdoch building. And there's masses of them. So that Media Select Committee, we can now see 7 of its members were having their mobile phones hit by these completely unexplained short calls from the Murdoch building.
And you use your words characteristically carefully. When you say hit, you mean called or contacted. They will continue to deny all wrongdoing, but the modus operandi of people that we know were hacking involves calling up the phones and then practicing the dark arts to get into voicemails. But as we say, they will completely deny that is what was going on here.
Yes, so if they say these were legitimate calls from journalists, and the politicians say, hang on, we didn't have these calls.
I never spoke to this person in my life.
So then the Murdoch companies say, well, it could just be text messages.
Right.
Well, actually, the claimant's lawyers have weeded out the text messages. That only takes a second. So these are longer than text messages, shorter than... We're at a very early stage with this, but it looks as though there was a major operation being run from the Murdoch building to interfere with the heart of our government. So there's masses of activity around these MPs trying to investigate the hacking. There's a whole another cluster of these calls. You remember, go back a year from when the Millie Dowler story got everything to blow up. We've had the election in May 2010, the coalition government. June 2010, the Murdoch people announced that the biggest deal of Rupert Murdoch's career, which is to take over that large chunk of B-Sky B, which he doesn't already own. In order to make that happen, they have to make sure the government doesn't refer the whole thing to the regulators, the Competition Commission and so on. And there's 2 politicians in the middle of that. Vince Cable, who was the business secretary, he has to make that decision. And also Norman Lamb, who was the right-hand man to the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg. Okay, June the 10th, 2010, James Murdoch sends his lobbyist to see Norman Lamb, the Deputy Prime Minister's right-hand man, to say, tomorrow we're going to announce this huge bid for B-Sky B. Now, on that day, 6 mysterious calls go from the Murdoch building into Vince Cable's mobile phone. He's the guy who's got to make the decision. That's not getting a story. That's not journalists calling him. That looks like we need to know what Vince Cable is saying or what his advisors are saying to him. And in and around that day, there's 5 more calls into Norman Lamb's mobile phone. What's going on? So we don't quite know. What's really interesting about this, I'm sorry I'm talking so much, James. It used to be.
I'd be very cross if you stopped.
But it's really interesting because all we've got is like the foundation of a building, and that building's not there in terms of evidence. I think we're absolutely entitled to be highly suspicious about what was going on. Yes. We're entitled to suspect it may still be going on. The evidence of these hub calls that's been disclosed in court stops around 10 years ago. That doesn't mean the call stopped. It just means the evidence has stopped. So we have every reason to suspect that there was a major intelligence gathering operation from the Murdoch building which interfered with the heart of government. You think about it, it's the government's decision on our behalf to decide whether or not Murdoch should be allowed to buy B-Sky B. And they're in there spying in order to be able to get ahead of the government and make sure their deal goes through.
That's the allegation and the detail.
I think you can, allegation, suspicion. I agree. Yes. There's an element of doubt about it. You're right to highlight that. But there's something. It's very difficult to look at that evidence and not be suspicious.
I'm struck by how animated you are. I mean, having been at this coalface for so long, you can't quite believe what you believe you've stumbled across.
Yeah, exactly that. Because I'm sitting there going through all this evidence, and I keep saying, I can't believe it. There it is in black and white. There's another aspect to this as well. You know, this all starts August 2006. When the police arrest the royal correspondent of the News of the World, Clive Goodman, and the PI, the private investigator, Glenn
one rogue reporter.
All that stuff. Right. Everybody assumed that at that point, the Murdoch titles and the rest of Fleet Street stopped committing crimes to get stories. It would be mad to continue. Guess what? They continued. This is separate from the political intelligence gathering. There's a story on the Prospect website which shows the detail of them carrying on hacking while the Guardian are uncovering it, while the police launch Operation Wheating, while Lord Justice Leveson is sitting taking evidence from the editors who are saying nothing going on, their reporters and private investigators are still breaking the law. It's breathtaking. You sit there thinking, just like you said, I can't believe this. Are they mad?
Which brings us to the tricky question, doesn't it? I mean, you're describing an attitude of impunity.
Yeah.
Are there any chinks in the armour of that impunity as far as you can tell looking forward? Do you think that this is going to reach parts that previous investigations didn't reach or previous reports didn't reach?
Okay, so there's two aspects to it. There are more and more politicians who are suing. And as I said, each of them, as they sue, will get call data and internal emails. And so that will begin to see whether there's a building to be put on this foundation. Separately, the question is, will Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, tell somebody to enforce the law? Now, the evidence that's already emerged in court justifies, in my humble opinion, launching an inquiry, questioning people under caution. But the whole history of the relationship between the Metropolitan Police and the Murdoch Company is of fear. So as a PS to that, one of the things that Prospect discloses is that when the big hacking trial ended, Rebecca Brooks acquitted, Andy Coulson sent to prison, the police had told Rupert Murdoch that they wanted to interview him under caution as a suspect. And I put that on the front page of The Guardian.
I remember.
Murdoch's lawyers had a fit, got very, very cross with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And the result was that they withdrew their intent to question him. I've never heard of any suspect in the history of British policing who was able to say, I'm not going to let you interview me. And here are my lawyers to tell you again. And I tell you what did happen. They launched a leaks inquiry to find out how I'd got that story. So the priorities aren't clear here. They ought to be investigating this wealth of evidence that's emerged in the High Court, but I doubt whether they will.
Do you?
Well, you know the way power works.
Well, I do. And I also know that this is precisely the sort of symbiosis that Leveson 2 was supposed to be looking at.
Yeah, and again, they had the power to twist government's arms to stop Leveson 2 happening.
And chose, and succeeded.
This is just to sum up in a way, what makes that phone hacking saga so extraordinary and why it's still running after all these years. It isn't a story about journalists committing minor crimes. It's all about power and who has it and who abuses it. That's what it's about.
And I mean, comprehensive write-ups already for Prospect, both in the print and the online editions. I'd urge everybody to get hold of that, to access both, actually, to buy a copy of the magazine and to get online and look at what appears under headlines like "Exposed How Powerful Newspapers Hacked Phones During Leveson." I sense you're not finished, Nick.
Oh, well, I wasn't sure whether I talked too much.
No, I didn't mean the interview. I meant the mission.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, I think I've done 10 stories and maybe about 7 of them are on the website. So there's 2 or 3 more to come.
All right, I've got a story on a much less serious note.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the phone hacking story is in the process of getting a post office scandal treatment in a dramatic context? I have heard whispers myself.
Yeah. There's a big TV drama project about the phone hacking, which is being filmed at the moment. I think I'm not allowed to talk about it.
No, I don't think you are either. This is me getting the first scoop of my career, Nick Davies. This is an incredible moment. I will say no more about it. But
there's some really brilliant people.
Well, and we saw what happened with Horizon. We saw that put into the public space the level of scandal that sometimes drama can achieve and journalism can't.
Yeah, it's true, but I'm not allowed to talk about it.
No, well, then we will not say another word.
One important thing is that they're filming. It takes ages to edit.
Right.
I think we're talking late next year at the earliest before this hits the screen. Maybe I'll come back and talk to you then.
Well, you'll come back and talk to me before. I'd love to get you on the podcast so we can dig really deeply into the whole sort of years of work that you've done. But this tranche is not over. There's still more to see.
There is still more to come. This afternoon, they're posting an interesting story about Will Lewis, who was Rebecca Brooks's right-hand man in the Murdoch Company when the hacking thing was emerging. He's now very important in the United States as the publisher of the Washington Post.
Of course.
And the allegation in court is pretty serious that he was involved in perverting the course of justice. I was contacting his office last night, and he said that he doesn't have any comment to make about that. But it's fair to say there is a detailed allegation emerging from this evidence He's not commenting on it. The allegation hasn't been tested, but it's there. And I think the American press might pick up on it.
Well, with rather more. In fact, that happened the first time around, didn't it? The New York Times were a lot more interested in your work and indeed did some work of their own than many of our colleagues on Fleet Street have ever shown any interest in doing at all, for the reasons that you alluded to at the beginning of this conversation. Nick, we'll talk again. Thank you for that. I urge everybody to get over to Prospect. And I'm moving on only because we have a story of comparable journalistic importance to discuss next, which is the decision by the Israeli government to essentially ban Al Jazeera from the country. We'll be talking to the managing editor of Al Jazeera Arabic after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:54. Mohammed Mowad is the managing editor of Al Jazeera in Doha, Qatar, and joins me now. We're short of time, Mohammed, but the Israeli government has moved to shut down the operations of your television network in the country, branding it a mouthpiece for Hamas. I mean, is that your understanding of the rationale for this decision?
Actually, thanks for having me first. Actually, we haven't got any rationale. This is baseless, unfounded allegations that we have heard before, by the way, in the Middle East, when authoritarian regimes in the Arab world shut down Al Jazeera offices in some countries. So it's a copycat. I mean, but we have heard from the Minister of Justice yesterday that he is telling the families of the hostages in Gaza that he is watching Al Jazeera to know what's going on in the war and with the negotiations and to update them, because the government isn't letting him to know anything. And he says that he understands Arabic. That's why he's relying on Al Jazeera. So basically that gets you to understand that maybe the Israeli government doesn't want the Israeli public to know more about what's going on from the other side, because Al Jazeera's coverage is impartial. We're making sure to air all the statements by the Israeli government, as well as airing all the statements by Hamas. So that kind of full picture and two narratives story isn't present in Israel. And you know that they are having a very restrict law that puts everything related to covering the war within the hands of the IDF commissioners. So I don't think that any rationale was given. This is just a baseless allegations, like what we have heard in the Middle East before when shutting down our offices, saying that when we cover unsavory actions and aspects of governments and officials, that you are a threat to the national security.
And what form has the closure taken? I believe there's been a raid on your offices. Is that correct?
Exactly. They have raided the remote location that our team used to go live from in Jerusalem. They have shut down the office in Jerusalem as well. And of course, the whole situation is ambiguous, and they can go far as much Netanyahu is concerned. They can even include the West Bank if they want, because this is an emergency law, and the actions taken by the Minister of Communications could be widened, could be more aggressive, more intimidating. And we expect that. Actually, this is the least dangerous decision taken by the Israeli government, because, as you know, they have killed 3 of our colleagues covering from the front line with Israeli airstrikes. So this is not going to deter us from continuing the impartial and objective coverage. We are committed to that, to our audience. Millions of views in the Middle East. People are turning on Al Jazeera to know all the details about what's going on. And we will make sure that the Israeli narrative is present, is there, despite the constraints, despite that our colleagues are now moved to cover from the West Bank remotely, covering what's happening in Israel. But the Israeli turmoil, the Israeli issues, the Israeli affairs is present on our screen. The statements of the Prime Minister and his officials is aired on our screen.
Will still be part of your coverage.
Exactly.
Indeed, to that point, I should add that the Foreign Press Association, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and the United Nations Human Rights Office have all called upon the Israeli government to reverse the ban. And you've alluded to something I was going to raise next, which is the losses of your colleagues on the ground. A quick word, if you would, Mohammed, because we are short of time, on how true it is, because we're still not getting an entirely clear picture here for reasons that are part of the premise of the question, actually, but how true it is to say that Al Jazeera in Gaza are providing some of the only reporters actually on the ground in the region.
This is very true when you know that no international journalist has been allowed to enter Gaza to cover from there since the beginning of the war. We are the only organization covering from inside Gaza in the north, south, and the the center of Gaza, and we will continue the coverage, and we are committed to that.
I've just got a note in front of me that says this Zoom link will expire at 1300 hours, and it's now 12:59 and 25 seconds, Mohammed. So I think we shall bid farewell and with thanks for your time today. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There's BBC have got in as well with foreign-based journalists on Gazan.
They're Gazan journalists, yeah.
Absolutely right. See, always have a grown-up in the room when you're dealing with the big stuff. If you missed any of today's show, you can catch up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.